Marketing and Communications Manager at DCL, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know we'll allow time at the end of the webinar for questions and answers, so please write your questions in the chat area as they come to mind. If we don't have time to answer them all, we will make them available on our website. For those of you who are not familiar with DCL, we convert and organize content to create electronic documents, populate databases, and publish on the web, basically getting it ready for tomorrow's technology. DCL services help you refine your document conversion strategy, identify document redundancy, extract metadata, and transform legacy and future documents for real needs, today and in the future. Today we are thrilled to introduce Elliot Kimmer, who is a founding and active member of the DITA Technical Committee. Elliot was responsible for the majority of the new proposals in DITA 1.3, although not necessarily the most interesting proposals. Elliot has been working with structured documents and complex markup for over 30 years. He's a founding member of the W3C XML Working Group and an editor in High Times 2nd edition. Elliot is the founder and primary contributor to the open source DITA for Publishers project and author of DITA for practitioners. Elliot lives and works in Austin, Texas. Without further ado, welcome, Elliot.
Thank you, Adam.
And before you start, we're still not seeing your screen.
Still not seeing my screen. Okay. How's that? Is that working?
No. Give me 1 second.
Oh, you know what? Let's try that.
There we go. There we go.
All right, good. Okay, sorry. For some reason, I can't figure out how to make PowerPoint work. Just very sad. All right. So today we're going to talk about how to deal with managing anchors in your deliverables that are produced from DITA, and how to do that using keys. So as Adam said in the introduction, I've been doing this for a long time. So we're going to talk about public anchors. What do I mean by public anchors? I'm going to talk a little bit about the difference between navigation and resource keys. Talk a little bit about key definition and usage best practice. And then what does it mean to generate public deliverable anchors? So DITA 1.2 introduced the feature of keys. And keys are a way to do indirect addressing that allows you to define keys in a map, and then from topics or from maps you can reference those keys. And the same key can be bound to different targets, whether that's a different topic or graphic or web page, whatever, can be bound to different topics in different maps. And that's essential for reuse. So if you're going to be reusing topics in different contexts, you need to be able to basically redirect a reference from that topic to the appropriate place for that topic as used in a specific publication. Basic rule that then provides is use keys for everything. So anything you're going to point to in DITA for any purpose, almost without exception, you should use keys for that. And we can talk about that a little bit more. And the principle there is that you should have exactly one URI reference to each resource across all the maps. So by URI reference, I mean the value of the href attribute, right? In DITA, the href attribute it's a URL or a URN, so collectively URIs, to things. For a given thing that's going to be used in your content, you want to have exactly one of those. And that way, when things move, you only have to change one place. Another important principle is to put unique keys on each navigation topic ref. If you want that topic ref, that topic to be publicly linkable, or it's something that you're going to cross-reference to, and I'll talk about that in a bit more detail. We want to use navigation keys to determine our deliverable anchors, and that's really the practical point of this talk today, is using navigation keys as your deliverable anchors. And then, of course, we don't want to change navigation keys unnecessarily. I have a client right now that has published a whole lot of publications, and they've been publishing them for many years to their website. They migrated from older markup to DITA. As a side effect, the HTML they were generating had different file names, different IDs in those files. Suddenly their customers started complaining because the bookmarks that those customers had created to specific parts of their publications no longer work. It's a big problem. They're having to scramble to fix that and, you know, do things on the web server side or go back and rework their publication process and so forth. So it's an important issue, but it's not one that you're necessarily going to think about as you're, you know, putting your markup strategy in place. So part of the point of this talk is to hopefully get you to start thinking about this issue of public anchors, because it's something that can easily be overlooked as you're implementing a data strategy or simply you know, improving the way that you're applying data to your current processes. All right, so what do I mean by public anchors? So public anchor is anything that can be linked to from outside the deliverable itself, right? So if I'm publishing HTML files, the names of those files and where they are within the website directory structure are public anchors, right? Because I can create a link directly to that. I can bookmark it in my web browser. I can create another HTML page that links to it and so forth. That's a public anchor. Within the HTML files, you might have ID values. Those become public anchors as well, because again, I can create a link into those HTML files, use those IDs, go right to a particular place. Within PDFs, you have what they call named destinations. So you can, you know, at least for certain PDF readers, you can link straight into specific places in PDFs. And of course, if you have help in a help system, those help topics have IDs and so forth. So depending on how you're delivering the content, there's going to be some form of public anchor that people can link into it. HTML and PDF are obviously the ones that we're most familiar with. Those anchors need to be reliably persistent, right? Specifically, you know, exactly for the reason that I just talked about. Right? Once you publish something and people start using it, they're gonna create links to it, right? If your documentation is useful, which you hope it is, people are going to, you know, at a minimum bookmark it, if not actually create links to it from other places. So you don't want to break those by changing those anchors. So they need to be persistent over time, right? And they shouldn't change from release to release for the same logical component, right? So as long as the same chapter or section or task is published, you'd like that to have the same anchor from release to the release as your content is updated. Distinction between navigation and resource keys. So starting with DITA 1.2, DITA makes the distinction between things you reference from maps that are resources and things that you reference from maps that are what we call normal role. So anything that's a normal role resource contributes to the navigation tree or to relationship tables, right? So that's what you would normally think of as the table of contents of your content that the map defines, or the relationship links that your rel tables define. Those are the, you know, the normal content of your publication that map defines. Resource-only topic refs establish a dependency to the resource, but they don't put it in the navigation tree, right? And the reason that we had to create that resource-only distinction was because you want to be able to refer to things from your map that are only used indirectly. In particular, what are typically called warehouse topics, right? So you've got warehouse topics that contain, you know, content that's going to be used by content reference. The topic itself doesn't occur anywhere in the flow, but it still needs to be referenced from the map. So we call those resource only. It's a very important distinction in maps, but there's also some subtle aspects of it that come into play when we talk about anchors and public anchors. So the processing role on the topic ref element indicates whether the processing role is normal, which is the default, or is resource only. There's a specialization of topic ref called key def, which is defined in DITA 1.2. On the key def element, the default for processing role is resource only. So if you see the key def element, we added that to make it easy to create these resource only references to topics or to images or whatever, and have them be resource only, right? So that's what you would use to set up, for example, your keys for your warehouse topics. Pretty much all the other topic refs, whether they're the generic topic ref element or there's some specialization of topic ref, the default processing role is normal. So resource-only keys establish a context-independent key for the topics, right? And the important thing there is that it's context-independent, right? these keys can be unique across all the maps if that's required, or they can be map, or in DITA 1.3, they can be key scope specific, right? And you know, whether you have your keys be unique across all your maps or only within a single map, it depends on how you're doing things. The key defining map serves as a catalog of topics or other resources, right? So typically when you're managing large sets of keys, you're going to do that by creating a separate map that has only key definitions in it. And then you can use that map in higher level maps in order to then, you know, have easy access to all these keys, and all the authors share the same keys, and, you know, makes things easier to manage. Those key defining maps can serve, for example, as catalogs of topics or resources, images, for example. Resource-only keys should be used for conrefs. So any topic that you're using as a container of things to be used by conref, you should always have a resource-only key associated with that, and that should be the key that you use on your con keyref attributes. And just to go back to what I said at the beginning about always use keys, I'm assuming here that you're always using key references for your conrefs. You're never using the conref attribute. You're always using the con keyref attribute. Right? If that's not the case today, you need to seriously consider making it be the case, because I think that's very important. Resource-only keys are not useful for cross-reference targets, right? That is, if you have an XREF element, you should not be pointing to resource-only keys. And the reason for that is that the key that you're pointing to doesn't have any defined place in the navigation structure of the publication, right? I mean, that's the whole point of resource-only keys, is that they're not part of the navigation structure, right? So if you have a cross-reference, for example, to a topic that's only using a resource-only key, there's no guarantee that that topic is even published as part of the publication, right? So you should not use resource-only keys for cross-reference targets. Now, that is probably not what you're doing today, right? If you're using keys, you've probably set up resource-only keys using key def element, and then you're creating cross-references to those resource-only keys. That will work when it's the case that the topic you're referencing is in fact published in the navigation structure, or it only occurs once in the publication. And at least for HTML output, you'll get the result you wanted, but you're getting it by accident. If that topic is used multiple times in the map, then you have a problem, because it's not clear which use of that topic you actually want your cross-reference to go to. If the topic isn't actually used in the navigation structure, then you could have a broken link in your output. So that's, you know, very important that you not use resource-only keys for cross-references. But that's a subtlety that I think most people, even myself, until you know, a year or so ago, hadn't really thought about. So I'm telling you about it now. You may need to go back and rethink the way that you're using keys and cross-references. Oops, that was not intended. Okay, so normal role, or what I call navigation keys, right? So I make the distinction between stuff that contributes to the navigation structure of your publication and stuff that doesn't. So the resource-only topic refs do not contribute to the navigation. The normal role topic refs contribute to navigation, either because they're defining the main table of contents structure of your publication, or because they're used in relationship tables, right? So your normal role navigation key identifies the unique uses of a given topic, right? So every topic ref, every normal role topic ref in a map that references a topic is establishing a use of that topic in that specific location, right? So there's no ambiguity about where that topic's being used in the structure of that publication for that, with that topic ref. These are the only appropriate targets for cross-references, right? Because they establish that place in the navigation structure, right? So if I have a cross-reference to a normal role topic ref, there's no question which use of that topic I mean that one I just pointed to. The other interesting things about navigation keys, by the nature of keys, right, they're globally unique within a single root map, right? So one of the rules for keys that the DITA standard imposes is that keys have to be globally unique within the scope of a given root map, right? So when I put my keys on my navigation topic refs, they have to be unique. So I don't have to worry about, I'm naturally going to have unique labels for each use of my topic, because that's the rule that DITA imposes. Okay, so that leads us to key definition and usage best practice. So we want to define resource-only keys in a standalone key definition map. That's as far as I know, that's pretty typical practice today, right? And here we're using the key def element, which is provided in DITA 1.2. It's a specialization of topicref, and it sets the processing role attribute to the default of resource only. Yeah, and this serves to give me a context-independent key for whatever topic or image or whatever that I'm referencing, right? So here I've got a key topic, some arbitrary number, and it's pointing to my topic file, wherever that is, right? I want to use resource-only keys from navigation topic refs to then bind that topic into the navigation structure. So here I have a chapter topic ref, as you might have in a book map. I'm giving it a key chapter-01. The key on this chapter element reflects the location of that chapter in the structure of this particular publication, right? So in that case, a key like chapter 01 makes sense because it's the first chapter, right, we'll say. Then it has a key ref pointing to topic and this opaque number, which is that key def I defined before, right? So this is implementing our policy of having only one URI reference to the topic, right? So the only place that I have a reference to the actual topic itself is on the key definition. My use of that topic from the navigation structure of the map is via the key, right? So if this topic moves, right, if I change its location or I change its name, I only have to update the key def. All my references to that topic in my navigation structures are unchanged. I want to put keys on either all navigation topic refs or on those navigation topic refs that I want to be publicly linkable. Right? I mean, the easy thing to do is just put a key on every navigation topic ref and don't have to think about it and you're done. But you might have some policies where you want to limit, well, not necessarily limit, but you want to make a certain promise to your readers to say, for example, we're going to guarantee that the chapter anchors and say the subsection, the first level of section within chapters, those will be persistent. We encourage you to link to those, but below that, we're not going to guarantee persistence. So, if you link to that, you're on your own, right? So by choosing where you put your keys on your navigation topic refs, you can control or possibly control, what anchors are public and what anchors are not public. Public in the sense of these are things that I'm making available to my readers of my content as published, and asserting that these are things they can use reliably. Public in the same sense as a public API, for example, right? It's a contract between you and the users of your content as to what things are going to be maintained and kept consistent from release to release. Right, so we want exactly one URI reference for each resource. Yeah. So for images and external web resources, we want to always define a key, and we always want to refer to that key and only the key from topics. So that ensures that we don't have references, to individual image files directly by URI within our topics. And we also don't have references to external web resources directly from our topics, because those are things that are likely to change quite a bit. We might have other reasons for having them be different. For example, if I'm creating a specific version of a publication for a specific, product release or variant or something, for example, I may want to have different versions, different, content, different versions of an image. I can do that easily if I have referenced it through a key. I have to modify the topic itself if I've done that with the direct URI reference. Likewise for our resources. So this is really just, back to my general rule, always use keys for everything, right? For topics that are reused or that are likely to be reused, you want to define resource-only keys in that separate key defining map. Yeah. If you have topics that are only ever used in a single map, which for most of us using DITA, most of our topics are never reused, right? It's a rare user of DITA that actually has, like, you know, most of the topics being reused. So for most of us, our topics, you know, there's a few topics that are reused heavily, but most of our topics are not reused. In that case, you can simply put the keys attribute on the topic ref to the topic. When I first gave this presentation back in at the DITA conference back in April, I had presented my rule a little more dogmatically, and I said, you know, for every topic you have a separate key def and that separate key defining map, and then you only reference those keys from your navigation structure. And a few people came up to me and they said, you know, Elliot, that's, you know, that's silly, that's too much work. And I said, you're right. So I've moderated my position a little bit. If most of your topics aren't reused, then, you know, maybe you don't need to have that separate key defining map, and you don't necessarily need to be as strict about your keys. On the other hand, there's a certain value to just, you know, doing things in a certain consistent way, regardless of the reuse, getting that set up once, and just, you know, not having to think about how you're going to do things. So you have to decide. All right, keys for single-use topics. So if a topic's only used once across all maps, or in each map that uses it, it's only used once, may not justify the cost of separate resource-only key definition, right? Because there is a cost to getting these, you know, setting up these keys. Somebody's got to set up these key definition maps. They've got to keep them up to date. Authors have to know where they are and so forth. So those key definition maps have value, but they also have a cost. So maybe you don't always need that cost. In the case where you only have the navigation topic ref for a topic, you still want to put two keys on that topic ref. You want to have one that reflects the specific use of that topic in that publication. So for example, here I've got, you know, chapter 1, subsection 1, reflecting, you know, the place where that topic is in the publication structure. And I'd also like to have one that represents the topic in any context. So here, topic 1, 2, 3, 5 just means this is a topic. I don't know where it's being used. And here's an example of that. I have a keys attribute. On the keys attribute, the reason it's called keys is because you can specify multiple key names in the attribute itself. Right? So here I have two values pointing to the same topic. Now, if that topic's ever reused, you can then, at that time, create that separate resource-only key definition, move the context-independent key to that key definition. All your key references still work, but, you know, you've got everything organized correctly. All right. I do need to point out a limitation in the DITA Open Toolkit. If you do implement this approach for doing things, there's a limitation in the 2.1 versions and earlier that if you're using copy to on navigation topic refs that themselves use a key ref to another topic, it doesn't work because of the way the copy to processing is done. There's a workaround, which I've described here. I'm not going to go into it in any detail here, but just point out that you could run into this depending on what you're doing. There's a workaround for it. For complete DITA 1.3 support, the Open Toolkit team has to completely rethink the way that key processing is done and copy to processing is done. They're in the process of doing that now. Hopefully, as a side effect of that, this issue will get resolved. It's a particularly subtle and complicated aspect of DITA processing that the DITA 1.3 adds. All right, have some examples here. So here's a route map for a publication, and so I've got a map reference to my key defining map. So that's keydefs 01.ditamap. That's you can take that as being a map that has a whole bunch of key definitions in it. Then I have my navigation structure. I know it's my navigation structure because I've got generic topic refs, and they don't change the value of the processing role attribute, so therefore they must be normal role topic refs, right? And you can see for each one of these, I've got a keys attribute that reflects the structural location or the semantic use of that topic within the context of this publication, and then there's a key reference to a context-independent key, which we'll assume is defined in that key defining map. Yeah. So this is the sort of pure implementation of my basic principle here. So we have we have navigation location specific keys on each of these topicrefs. That gives me anchors that I can point to that are meaningful in the context of this publication. Yeah, and then I have key references to the topics using their resource-only keys, and that avoids having multiple URI references to the same topic file. Here's my key defining map, and so you can see here we've got key def elements. So we've already said that the key def creates resource-only topicrefs. I've got my context-independent key names, and they're pointing to DITA files. And here you can see I've used the convention where my key name is the same as the topic file name. This is a pretty typical convention if your topics already have globally unique names, which is often the case, then why not just use the file name as a key name? Right? There's no particular magic to the key names in this context. We just want them to be unique, probably unique across all of our topics. If you have a CCMS system, for example, that imposes some sort of UUID, that would work as well. The names that you use here are not important as long as you have some convention for them. Then here's an example of my cross-references. So from some topics also used from this map, you can see that my key ref is to the navigation-specific keys, chapter 1, not to the resource-only topicrefs. And that's required so that my cross-reference will be to a reliable location in that publication for that topic as used in that publication. Here I've used names like chapter 1. That's partly because, just to make my examples a little bit clearer, to make my point about the distinction between resource-only keys and navigation keys a little more obvious. In practice, you probably wouldn't want to use keys like chapter 1, chapter 2. You probably want to use keys that more reflect the semantic of that content, installation chapter, installation procedure, or assembly instructions, or whatever it is, something that's a little less bound to the specific, for example, order that things occur, more bound to the rhetorical purpose that content is playing in your publication. But it's something you've got to work out for your own content. All right, so we've got our keys in place. We now understand we have to have keys for everything. We need to have this distinction between our navigation keys and our resource-only keys. Now we want to create some deliverables, and we want those deliverables to reflect our public anchors, right? So part of the goal here is to use the navigation keys as the basis for the anchors in our publications as delivered. Yeah. So what we'd like to have is, for example, if I have a cross-reference to chapter 1, subsection 2, I would like that in the HTML to become a reference to chapter 1.html and a unique key corresponding to the subsection ID. Right. So in this context, that combination of the HTML file name and the ID within an HTML file is an anchor in the deliverable, right? That's something that somebody from outside can create a link to and get to that point in that HTML file, right? So that's an anchor in the general sense, right? So when I'm generating links, when I'm generating HTML, for example, for my data content, it's easy to generate the links if we don't care what the anchor values are, right? I can just have some function that just generates a unique value for every output file, generates unique values for my IDs, and I just make sure everything's hooked up as I'm publishing it and it works. But the resulting IDs are just going to be randomly generated. They're not going to be reliable from release to release. Yeah. If you ever looked inside XML content or HTML content that's been generated with XSLT, and you see values starting like with D and then some numbers, that's a sure indication that they've used the generate ID function in their XSLT engine, because that's the pattern that, for example, Saxon uses when generating IDs. Those generated IDs are determined entirely by the XML structure. If the XML structure is different, you're going to get different ID values. So those are not reliable as persistent anchors, right? So if I want to generate links and I want to have more persistent anchors, the data processing gets a little bit harder, right? So why do we care about the anchors? Right? We've talked about this already, right? We want people to be able to link to things and have those links work in the future as we update our content. So how can we generate these deliverable anchors, these public deliverable anchors? So there's two basic use cases that we have. There's multi-file outputs, which is pretty much anything based on HTML, online help, and then monolithic outputs. So PDF, EPUB, anything where all the content is delivered, as a single file unit, So like EPUBs inside, there are a bunch of HTML files, but the EPUB itself is still delivered as a single unit. So I lump that in with the monolithic outputs, right? So there is a general problem, which is the anchors for non-topic elements. The reason that's a problem is because within the map, my keys only bind keys bind to topics, right? In a map, a topic ref points to a topic. You can't use a topic ref to point directly to something inside of a topic. So we have, if we're going to point to something inside a topic, for example, I want to point to a figure, or I want to point to a table, or a step within a procedure, that needs to also have an ID on it. Those IDs are only unique within that single topic. There's no require in DITA that those IDs be unique even within a single XML document, right? So, for example, if you have an XML document that has multiple topics in it, the IDs within those topics don't have to be unique across all those topics. They still only have to be unique within a single topic. Likewise, if I'm using, for example, if I'm using chunking to combine multiple topics into a single HTML output file, which is pretty typical, right? Oftentimes you'll say, I want to have, for each chapter, I want to have a single HTML file, even though the chapter is authored as multiple topics that are put together in a map. Well, when I bring all those topics together in a single HTML file, the IDs for the elements within those topics are no longer going to be necessarily unique within that single HTML file, and they need to be in order for ID-based addressing to work in HTML. Right? So I have to do something to combine my keys with element IDs to create some sort of, reliably unique ID in my output files. So you need to be aware of that aspect as well. So for my multi-file outputs, I'm going to use my navigation keys to determine the result file names. So the basic rule for data processing for generating HTML, certainly this is what the Open Toolkit does, is for every input source topic, there's a corresponding HTML file. The way the Data Open Toolkit works out of the box is whatever that source file name is used as the HTML file name. And here we want to change that so that instead of using the source topic file name as the HTML file name, we want to use the navigation key that we've used to reference that topic as the result HTML file name, right? So for example, in this here, I've got a topic ref. The key is chapter 1. The topic file name is, topic ABC123. I want to generate chapter 1 HTML, not topic ABC123 HTML, right? And I can do that by using the value of the keys attribute to determine the result file name. And then I can also use the navigation key plus element IDs to construct the IDs for things below the topic level, right? And that's fairly straightforward to do. Now, one of the reasons this works is because in DITA, my keys have to be unique within a map, right? So I can be, as long as I've made sure that I've done that correctly, which I should have, then I know that each of my navigation keys is going to result in a unique file name for each of the output HTML files. And then I also know that the navigation key plus the element ID for elements within a given topic is always going to be unique, right? Because if the topic key is unique, then the topic key plus the element ID must continue to be unique. All right, so for monolithic outputs, I can use the navigation key for topic anchors. So that's in the context of PDF, that's your named locations. And then again, I can use the navigation key plus the element ID for non-topic anchors. One challenge in PDF is that all the string value of that named anchor has to be something that's legal in a URL, and that means that there's some characters that you might have in your IDs or your keys, or that you might normally use to join up, the topic key name and the element ID that won't work here. And then you also have some issues. You could have some accidental collisions. So you just need to be aware of this detail as well. So to implement this, I've created some pre-processing extensions. This is part of the DITA community project. DITA community is an open source project on GitHub. It's a repository for a wide variety of general purpose data processing. Most of them are Open Toolkit plugins, but there's some other stuff there as well. So I have a pre-processing extension, and what it does is it adds copy to attributes to topicrefs in order to ensure that every reference to a topic results in a unique file name, and also use keys to determine the file name value. I currently don't have that completely implemented yet because there are some subtle complexities there, but I do have a simple version of that working now. I actually forgot to update this slide to reflect that. Currently, this pre-processing extension only works with the 1.8.5 Open Toolkit. We have plans to support the 2.x toolkit, but I just haven't gotten to that yet. The ANT details changed from 1.8 to 2.1, and that broke that breaks the plugin in 2.x. We know how to fix it. We just haven't gotten to it yet. But this gives you an easy way to at least implement a simple version of this proposal. All right, so to summarize, always use keys, right? I mean, this is, if you get nothing else out of this talk, if you're like, oh, I don't really care about any of that public anchor stuff, do get that you should use keys for everything, right? You want keys for references to topics, you want keys for references to images, you want to use keys for references to pure maps, which is a new feature in DITA 1.3. You want to use keys for references to any external scope resources, web pages that you might have pointers to, PDF files that are published separately, any of those things. You want to use keys for all of that, right? You want to put keys on your navigation topicrefs. Your cross references should point to navigation keys, not to resource-only keys. And then use navigation keys to generate the anchors in your deliverables. And it's that navigation key, using the navigation keys to generate your anchors, is what gives you that possibility to have persistence across releases, right? Something I didn't really focus on earlier when I was talking about this is that because the keys are defined in maps, that gives the owner of the map complete control over what those values are, right? So in DITA, especially with DITA 1.2 and the availability of keys, there becomes a requirement in your documentation group to have one or more people who are responsible for the definition of the maps and maintaining those. And we've started trying to call that person the information architect. They're responsible for the maps, they're responsible for the keys, they should be responsible for naming conventions and so forth. Because the owner of the map has complete control over all the keys, that means that they have the opportunity to maintain, set up a naming convention, set up those navigation keys in the maps, and then ensure that they are consistent over time. And that's the mechanism by which you can then have some hope of control of your public anchors over time. So if your public anchors are determined by your navigation keys, you have some hope of making this work. Otherwise, I don't see how it could ever be made to work. All right, there's a few resources. The paper, as I wrote it for the DITA North America conference, is published. Pre-processing extensions are available there on GitHub, and of course, if you want to get hold of me, there's my email address. And I believe that is everything I had prepared. So back to you, Adam.
Well, thank you, Elliot. A very informative webinar indeed. We've had some questions that have come in, with the first one being, how do we manage the key names and key maps?
How do you manage the key names and key maps? Well, I was going to say carefully, but that's not really a very useful answer. This goes back to that role of the information architect, right? Once you have, these names, they have to be coordinated and managed, right? And so somebody needs to be responsible for that. How you go about doing that is, to some degree, it's a function of the nature of your documentation, how how the products relate to each other, and so forth. Who's responsible. It could also depend on the content management systems that you've got. You would hope that if you've got a content management system, it provides some services for managing these sets of names. But from a pure practical standpoint, if you just have a separate map that has nothing but key definitions in it, that serves as a repository of the names, right? So you can go to that map, you can see what all the names are, you can allocate new names as you need to, and so that just serves as the place where you physically manage them, in the sense of how do I create them, how do I update them, how do I make sure that they bind to the right thing. That file sort of becomes the source of primary knowledge. The other thing that's very important is to have naming conventions, right? So you need to have naming conventions both for your source files and also for your keys, so that the names follow, are consistent just in how they're written down, and so that they make sense to the people using them. And that may require, some amount of effort as a team to work out what the naming conventions should be. Sometimes the naming conventions are arbitrary. Sometimes there's natural names that come out of the things that you're documenting. Sometimes you just need to come up, you just have to decide, all right, we're just going to name things in this way because we've decided that's what makes sense to us. I'm not sure that I have a better answer than that. Something I'm doing in a separate context, but that's related, is in the context of the Data for Small Teams project. I'm currently implementing some link management functionality. Part of that functionality is giving you visibility of all the keys that are defined in all the maps in some set of documents. So that's another aspect of it as well, right, is knowing what are all the keys across all my maps, how do they relate to each other. You can get that, some of that you can get just by having, all right, here's my set of key definition maps. I know where they are, I know who manages them, we have some business rules for how we take care of that. But you'd also like to have some tools, especially as the volume of your content gets larger, to manage that as well. And so for that, you would look to your content management systems, to your link management systems. Hopefully what I'm developing in Data for Small Teams will offer some assistance to people who don't have a more full-featured content management system.
Great, thank you, Elliot. The next question has come in is, what do you recommend for key naming conventions?
What do I recommend for key naming conventions? I like to have, there's a couple of aspects to that, because it depends, in both the context of whether you're talking about resource-only keys or navigation keys. For resource-only keys, if the file names of your resources, whether they're images or topics or the maps, are already unique and already follow a naming convention, then I just use those directly. So, file name and key are the same. If that's not the case, then you need to come up with some naming convention that makes sense. A lot of people like to have naming conventions that either reflect the topic type or reflect the subject area of the topics, so that you can tell from the key or the file name, what the topic is probably about, or what group of topics it goes into, task reference or whatever. For navigation topic refs, I like those to reflect the semantic or rhetorical use of the topic in the context of the publication as much as possible, right? So, installation, assembly, repair, maybe if it's a more conceptual publication, keys that reflect the subject area, so that you can have key references from your topics, right? If you're using cross references that are not specific to an actual ordered position in the publication, but are specific to the semantic use, so that it's more likely that in two different publications you might have two different topics, but they're playing the same semantic or rhetorical role in that publication. You'd like their keys to be the same. I like to have my key names start with the most general part first, and then have components that get more specific. So, for example, I would have, let's say I'm using key names that reflect the topic type. So I would have, concept dash, and then, some value rather than something dash concept. And the reason I do that is simply so that things, when keys are presented in lists in typical user interfaces, if they're sorted alphabetically, all the topics of the same type all the keys of the same type are going to sort together because they all start with the same characters. I like to use dashes to separate components of my keys. That's just my preference. That's probably about as much detail as I can get into for naming conventions outside of a specific context.
Well, great. Thank you, Elliot. The last question that's come in is how does DITA 1.3 key scopes affect this approach?
Yeah, so key scopes could either make it easier or harder, and I'm not sure which it'll end up being. So key scopes allow you to have named scopes, and within that scope, an unqualified reference to a key will resolve to that key as defined in that scope. And then if you want to reference a key in another scope, you can use a scope qualified key references. You can use scope name dot and then the key reference. That should give you some more flexibility in how you set up your key names, and in particular it would allow you to use sets of keys that have been developed independently without worrying about conflict, because you could always put them, like for example, if you reference key defining maps from your root map, you can put those key defining maps into different scopes. So that might help. You might be able to use scopes where before you would just have to have really long key names. Because the scope key facility in DITA 1.3 is still so new, we haven't had time to really apply it in a lot of different practical ways to really see how these things play out. But I think scope keys will definitely at least make this, give you some additional flexibility that you didn't necessarily have before. In particular, you don't necessarily have to worry about your key names being really totally globally unique, both for your navigation topic refs and for your resource-only topic refs.
Great. Thank you, Elliot. And thank you, everyone, for attending. This will conclude today's webinar. You'll be able to access the recorded version in the webinar archive section of our website located at www.dclab.com. Also, our next webinar will be Wednesday, October 7th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, titled DITA for Small Teams, an open source approach to DITA content management, being presented by Elliot Kimber of Contracts. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.